I'm Krishna Kumar, and on the show today we have two on points. On point one is on the Xi Jinping-Trump handshake in Korea. Is there a new world order that is in the making? On point two is on the rising racially fueled crimes in Canada targeting South Asians. But before that, first up, a quick check of all our headlines. Mumbai hostage crisis accused dies. The accused Rohit Arya, who took 20 children hostage, was shot during the rescue operation. Arya had taken 17 children, one senior citizen and one civilian hostage. All of them are now safe. India launches its biggest ever tri-service military drill, Operation Trishul, near the Pakistan border. 12-day exercise involving the Army, Navy and the Air Force to run until the 10th of November. The Ministry of External Affairs of India announces that the US has granted India 6 months exemption from American sanctions on the Chabahar port. On India-US trade talks, the Ministry of External Affairs says discussions are ongoing and both sides remain engaged to conclude the deal. The Supreme Court of India appoints a 3-member panel headed by a retired judge to monitor the CBI probe into the Karur stampede tragedy. The court also asked the Tamil Nadu government to appoint a nodal officer. TMC links the latest Bengal suicide to widespread fear over SIR and NRC, alleging rising anxiety and an atmosphere of fear among the masses. Delhi Police's shocking revelations on the 2020 riots. Affidavit claims that riots were politically motivated, part of an organized regime change operation. It's a landmark development with some very strong repercussions. Talking about the all-important Donald Trump-Xi Jinping handshake in Korea. Now, there seems to be a significant thaw in US-China relations, particularly when it comes to tariffs and trade on rare earths. After months of sharp shooting, US President Donald Trump announced that the tariffs imposed on China will be reduced by 10 percentage points. That is from 57% to 47%. This announcement was made soon after Trump and Xi Jinping met in Busan in South Korea amidst smiles.
But overall, I guess on the scale of from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would say the meeting was a 12. Okay, I think it was a 12. I think very importantly, just the whole relationship is very, very important. And I think it was really good.
The reduced tariffs on China are effective immediately. Trump said that after his meeting with the Chinese leader, he also said that the fentanyl-linked tariffs, the fentanyl drug flow-linked tariffs on China will now be reduced to 10% from 20%. Now, that meeting lasted a little over 100 minutes, with the two leaders shaking hands and Trump appearing to say something into Xi Jinping's ear just before the Chinese leader entered his own limousine. Trump was shortly back aboard the Air Force One to return to Washington. Xi Jinping will work very hard to stop the flow of fentanyl, said Trump, and that the tariff was reduced because he believed that they are really taking strong action.
On fentanyl, we agreed that he was going to work very hard to stop the flow. You know, it's a very complex subject because it's used for lots of different reasons, including anesthetics and things. But he's going to work very hard on it, precursors, and I think you're going to see some real action taken.
So this is the all-important meeting. All eyes were on it when Trump met Xi Jinping in Busan and agreed to trim the tariffs on China to 47% to 57% and also slashing the fentanyl-linked tariffs by 10% to 10%. Trump, as you just heard, has described the talks as a 12 on 10 and claimed that the issue around rare earths is quote-unquote settled. Their talks in Busan were their first face-to-face meeting since the year 2019, nearly 6 years. Trump said that Taiwan tensions did not come up in these talks. He said that China has agreed to keep rare earth exports flowing to the world as part of a one-year agreement and said that he expected it to be extended. He said, and I quote, all of the rare earth has been settled. And that's for the world, worldwide. You could say this was a worldwide situation, not just a US situation, said Trump.
All of the rare earth has been settled, and that's for the world. I mean, you know, worldwide. This, I guess you could really say this was a worldwide situation, not just a US situation. So we continue to produce the rare earths and buy the rare earths and everything else, you know, when you see from other countries. But China is, that whole situation, that roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all.
Rare earths, 17 elements which play tiny but vital roles in cars, planes and weapons have emerged from obscurity to become China's most potent source of leverage in its trade war with the US. China has a near monopoly on extracting rare earths as well as on refining them, which is the process of separating them from other minerals. The International Energy Agency estimates that China accounts for about 61% of rare earth production and 92% of their processing. Export controls introduced in April this year caused widespread shortages overseas, especially for magnets, forcing some automakers to pause production before exports rebounded, following deals between Beijing and Washington and the European Union to free up the flow of rare earths. China expanded those controls again in October, taking the total number of elements restricted to 12 and adding much of the equipment used to process them as well. The breakthrough in talks has been after a series of threats and rollbacks from Trump. On the 25th of August, Trump had threatened a 200% tariff on China, saying, and I quote, China has some cards. We have some too, but I don't want to play them. If I do, China will be ruined.
They have some cards. We have incredible cards, but I don't want to play those cards. That would, if I played those cards, that would destroy China. I'm not going to play those cards.
Post that, on the 9th of October, China announced increased restrictions on rare earth exports. The very next day, Trump declared a 100% tariff hike effective from the 1st of November, taking the total to 130%. He even threatened to cancel his upcoming meeting with Xi Jinping. China's Commerce Ministry warned of countermeasures if the US proceeded. Trump then softened again. What weakness has China identified in the US? China refines and processes over 90% of the world's rare earth materials, and the US depends on it for 70%, that's 70% of its supply. On Wednesday, 3 Indian companies, Continental India, Hitachi, and J. Ushin, received the country's first licenses to import rare earth magnets from Russia. Now, what will this mean? Some big questions staring at us. How is China using rare earth minerals as a geopolitical tool? Can the US afford to take on China given the dependence of its military-industrial complex on rare earth elements. How is India viewing the newfound Trump-Xi Jinping bonhomie? And is the Taiwan issue still unresolved? Now, to help us get some answers for some of those big questions, we have some very special people joining us. So we have Andrew K.P. Leung, business strategist and economist, joining us live from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. So we also have Professor Scott Lucas, Professor International Politics, Clinton Institute, University College of Dublin, joining us live from Dublin in Ireland. We have Ambassador Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the US, with us on the broadcast. We also have Professor Swaran Singh, Center for International Politics at JNU with us. Thank you all of you for taking time out to be with us. I'm going to begin by asking Andrew K.P. Leung a straightforward question. Look at what's happened, not just for China and the US, but for the world to behold. That all-important handshake with smiles, with Trump whispering something into Xi Jinping's ears. So many sticking points, but still we have no idea what will happen when it comes to Taiwan.
Well, first of all, let's not be fooled by the theatrics.
Okay.
I mean, as far as the whispering is concerned, I was just wondering whether it was whispering in Mandarin or in English. That way could be a problem. Anyway, I think that this is also a big show for President Trump, and he thinks that he still have a very strong cause to coerce China, whereas in reality, China has found this new stranglehold over Americans' Achilles heel. As you pointed out, and China accounts for something like 90% of some of the key elements that goes into Americans' military-industrial complex, including its most advanced armory, and of course that China has doubled down on this newfound countermeasure against American coercion by regulating not only the export of certain elements of rare earth, but also the equipment used to produce them, which required a license from Beijing, and also the intellectual property involved in producing these rare earths, because they are very, very complicated and hundreds of different elements. Depends on which element the processes are terribly intricate and extremely polluting. No other country wanted them in the beginning, so they are all lumped to China decades ago. And China has now mastered the technology, the processes to produce these rare earths, and has now found this a very effective instrument to counteract Trump's coercion. So you're seeing a lot of smoke and mirrors in front of the camera. But at the end of the day, the structural differences between the two countries are by no means resolved.
The structural differences between US and China is by no means resolved. Professor Scott Lucas, seems to be, as Andrew was talking about, a lot of show and tell in terms of where the relationship is headed. Even if this handshake doesn't exactly seal the deal on all those structural differences, it is great progress simply because you saw what happened when China put a restriction on the export of rare earth minerals. It hurt everybody, including the US. And when US is so dependent, 70% of its rare earth imports come from China. In that sense, the US needed this deal as much as anybody else.
Well, I think Andrew's absolutely right that this is not a big deal as much as a tactical maneuver.
Okay.
And in particular, it is China pushing back Trump's attempt to bully it from the spring. You might remember that at one point Trump was saying 245% tariffs on China. Let's review exactly what happened, that we know what happened so far. First of all, okay, the U.S. tariffs are at 47% on China, which is still going to affect American consumers, American manufacturers. China's tariffs are still, as far as I know, at 32% on American goods. More importantly, let's talk about rare earth minerals. China did agree to roll back the step of export controls on rare earth minerals that it took in October, but it has not lifted the step to control 7 rare earth minerals that it took in April after Trump made his attempt to bully it and the rest of the world with his global tariffs. So that leverage against rare earth minerals remains. Let's talk about soybeans. This was causing Trump a great deal of trouble because 50% of all American soybean exports go to China, and China was taking zero soybeans. Who does that affect? American farmers, a lot of whom Trump would like to vote for him. So China says, okay, we'll take more of your soybeans. Let's talk about fentanyl. Okay, China has agreed to take steps to limit the flow of precursors for fentanyl. That's something that Trump wants, but China has been doing that since 2024. So that's not absolutely a breakthrough thing. This is a contrast between two things. Trump wanted the photo opportunity. He wanted the big show. China wanted to get tactical space, not only with regard to the U.S., but with regard to other countries as it, and let's be very clear here, as it's trying to set up an alternative economic system. So, to simply say, I won, yay. Nah, this game isn't over. And it's far too serious for one man's ego to dominate the headlines.
Well, this game ain't over. Ambassador Meera Shankar, how does India, proceed strategically from here on, looking at all the bonhomie between them? This game is not over, but clearly they're making amends. Trump is making amends in his own way.
Well, first of all, as I said, no major deal emerged from this. There is an understanding on certain new trade frictions which had arisen over the last 3 months. The broader structure of strategic and economic competition continues. And we have what Trump said. The Chinese have not said anything specific about the understandings, but Trump said that it includes that China will roll back the restrictions on rare earth exports for a year, and that this will be reviewed every year, and that this is not just for the US but for the world. But we don't know what the details are. Secondly, Trump said that he will not impose the 100% tariffs that he had threatened with effect from November 1st. In response to the new restrictions that China had imposed on rare earth exports. And then he also said that he will reduce the fentanyl tariffs from 20% to 10%. So now, as the previous speaker said, the US has 47% tariffs on Chinese exports to the US, while China has 32% tariffs on US exports to China. Finally, Trump said that China will buy more soybeans. So that if you look at and he gave the meeting a rating of 12 out of 10, saying there were outstanding group decisions taken in this meeting. But if we take a look at what President Xi Jinping said, it was more circumspect. He said that the two delegations had met and had in-depth talks, and they'd reached a consensus to resolve problems. And he also said later that the US and China must broaden the areas of cooperation and reduce the areas of differences. So obviously differences remain, and the larger framework of strategic competition, I think, hasn't gone anywhere, because both countries are engaged in a race for technological dominance of the new technologies, which is really going to determine who will dominate globally in terms of the economy as well, because economic growth is now so linked to technological progress. That is one thing. Secondly, of course, we have, before the meeting, Trump called it a G2. And to some extent, that has been the burden of China's approach, basically wanting to be treated as an equal with the US. And you could see that Xi Jinping said that China and the US, as the two largest economies, can share the responsibility, together. So that is something which the US has been, China has been pressing for, but we really don't know what this means because we've been there before during the first term of President Obama when he began with this, whole policy of what was called strategic reassurance to China. That is, if the US reassured China on its core concerns like Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, China would cooperate more easily with the US on global issues. Didn't happen like that. And by the end of the Obama first term, the US had shifted and adopted what they called a pivot towards the Asia Pacific, later renamed as rebalancing because Europe said, this looks like you're turning your back on Europe. So, though China was not named specifically when that policy was adopted, we have seen since that in the strategic, planning and of the US or documents that they give out, they do identify China as the one country which has both the intention and the capability to challenge the US.
Okay.
So, but at the same time, the US does not seek or wants to avoid inadvertent conflict with China. So they would rather have a situation where the relationship is more stable, but it will be of managed competition.
Okay.
I think that would be the preference that the US has. But the Trump administration has been veering back and forth between accommodating spheres of influence and restricting their own priority to their hemisphere, or imperial expansionism, if you will, in pursuit of resources vis-a-vis Greenland, Canada, other countries, and even vis-a-vis China. There's no clarity how they wish to proceed. And which view or which line is going to prevail in the long run. I presume that it will be a mix of both accommodation and competition.
Okay.
But we have to wait and see. I think this is really just a kind of a reset of the recent trade frictions.
Okay.
But the I's have to be dotted even with regard to this. The I's have to be dotted, the T's have to be crossed, and the larger trade deal still remains to be negotiated.
Right. Professor Swaran Singh, that's the bottom line, isn't it? We have so much talk that's going around, but there is no deal, no India-China trade deal. If that was the case, we would be having a very different discussion at this stage, after the handshake. All we've got was handshakes, smiles, optics, and Trump, for some reason, tom-tomming that meeting as one of the best ever, 12 on 10, typical Trump terminology, so to speak. So this seems to be a lot of bluster from Trump.
That's right, and this is not the first time. That's how usual Trump's style is. Indeed, if you look at the 5 rounds of trade talks that China and United States had, starting from Madrid, then London, then Geneva, then Stockholm and Kuala Lumpur recently, invariably, not just Trump, the negotiating team of United States was much more vocal, and the Chinese side was invariably restrained, sometimes even muted. So even now, whatever we are discussing is based on that, sort of off-the-cuff remarks that President Trump had to media on Air Force One. There is no formal statement yet from White House, no readout or statement from Chinese side either. But whatever he said should be closer to the truth in that sense. So there is certain amount of understanding definitely after this grueling 5 rounds that the both sides have arrived. So we could describe it in terms of either a pause or truce or whatever way you want to call it, but it's not really a kind of a resolution of the trade or economic war that they have, which has turned out to be geopolitical war, way beyond trade technology wars, almost trying to sort of browbeat each other. And you remember when Trump had in April raised the tariffs, talking 145%, Chinese had popularized a very interesting expression at that time, which Mao had used in 1950s when he was talking of the nuclear blackmail of United States. Chinese were talking in terms of never bowing down to the American blackmail. This is a same Mao language, which again President Xi Jinping was reviving here. And in that sense, the determination on side of Chinese as to withstanding the United States pressures was very clear. And they were able to finally come out openly and weaponize rare earth elements in that sense. Though Trump was weaponizing tariffs from the very beginning, even during his first term, what is still to be known is, other than knowing that they are going to buy back about $12 billion of soybeans, relax for at least 1 year exports controls on rare earth elements, or a few other things, whether the Chinese, if you remember, in the very last days of President Trump's first term in January of 2021, Chinese had signed a kind of a trade deal with President Trump, saying they will be buying additional $250 billion worth of imports from United States. Now, that is an enormous lever that the Chinese have. And in this discussion, because President Trump loves to be a deal maker, and if he says he's going to give 12 out of 10, whether the Chinese made any such gesture of similar, sort of additional imports from United States. You remember, European Union has promised $600 billion of investments. Japanese have promised $550 billion of investments. That's what President Trump likes. And, the Chinese are not going to offer him highest civilian award or something that South Koreans have done recently. So what is it that made Trump so excited to say he's going to give 12 out of 10? Maybe there are certain things that are still going to be coming out as to what actually transpired in that 100-minute meeting between two leaders, which incidentally happened in a rather Spartan airport building, right? Which is perhaps itself restraining in certain ways as to how leaders deal with each other. But I think it's a good sign that the two sides did not have any, they didn't have any awkward movement in that sense. Happily, Taiwan was not mentioned, and Chinese will go home very happy with that. So I think overall, the fine meeting I will describe, but I wouldn't celebrate it in terms of ground shaking.
Okay.
Structural competition is bound to continue. That's not going to go, whatever happens, even if a new president comes on either side. Unless China becomes a 51st state of United States, or United States becomes a province of Chinese, that strategic competition is going to be the reality, because China is seen as inordinately large competitive power. And that will ensure that structural competition will always be there. How they manage it, I think that's where we have to focus. And absolutely. I think the meeting showed that they were intending to manage it.
Professor Scott Lucas, that is the brass tacks, isn't it? The competition is going to remain. But the larger question is, there are geopolitical issues over which, it felt like a very safe conversation to have, only on trade and, on the few sticking points around trade, leaving out major issues. Well, clearly, by no means was this a bilateral relationship conversation. This was purely on trade, and even that conversation on trade is not complete, so to speak. We don't know so many details about it.
Yeah, let me just say one thing, that for all of Trump's bluster, the number of completed trade deals that he has signed in 2025 is zero. We have trade frameworks, we have trade understandings, we do not have completed trade deals. So I suspect we all could be talking next month about his latest announcement. But that wider point is this was a bilateral conversation, but a lot of people are listening in. So, for example, what Professor saying was important is that Taiwan did not come up as a point of tension. And I think that understanding here is the U.S. does not press for Taiwanese independence. China does not threaten a military move against Taiwan. I think if you talk more widely, I think India is listening in, because they're looking at what's happening where Trump is playing nice with Xi, and they're saying, why do you still have 50% tariffs on us when you should think that we are important as well? Europe is listening in as well. Europe has its own issues that it needs to resolve with China, but also we're looking at a question as whether the United States is at the center of these economic and political relationships, or whether Trump's unpredictability means that you have to look elsewhere around Trump. And that's the key thing here is Donald Trump, he plays at being a deal maker on social media and on TV. China is a real deal maker, and the rest of the world is watching on that basis.
China is the real deal maker. Andrew K.P. Leung, the word for the word I'm looking for is compromise in English, and tuosie in Mandarin. That's the word for compromise in Mandarin from what I've read. So the tuosie seems to be what China is going for, and compromise is what the US seems to be going for, because both, in a sense, want this deal to happen, but on terms where neither of them lose.
Well, I think there's a huge difference in mindset in negotiations between China and the United States. This difference is also almost civilizational. For China, the ancient civilization also highlights the importance of the so-called golden mean. The golden mean is that no side is going to win everything. There's no point pushing to winner takes all. It's always a give and take, as in the case you're buying a product from someone, the buyer gets something, gets what he wants, the seller gets what he wants, so both sides are happy. But then for Trump and his China hawks, it's always American first, wanting American to be the winner, winner takes all, and if not, definitely the lion's share. And so I think that there's a huge difference in mindset, and all this rhetoric about he's getting excited about 12 out of 10, and then whispering in President Xi's ear. This is all part of the optics. I think there's still a lot of smoke and mirrors going on. I think one needs to look at the, as I said in the beginning, the structural differences between these two great powers. As American, there's a bipartisan consensus. The China is an existential threat to American leadership, to American dominance. And so the United States, the President Trump is using all the instruments in his arsenal to contain the rise of China, militarily with American allies, Japan, South Korea, and then Australia, and so on, and also ideology, painting China as a kind of evil empire, as it were, trying to delegitimize the Chinese Communist Party, and so on. So I think that this fundamental differences of mindset in negotiations still carries on.
Right.
And what is happening now is only a temporary pause. And then Trump, of course, zeroing on what he wants in the immediately, which is, of course, the soybeans in the light of his upcoming midterm elections, and also at least a temporary pause for 1 year, just suspending the rare earths restrictions just for 1 year. And there is, depending on how an American behaves, of course, China can always recalibrate the response.
Right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, this is a temporary pause from the looks of it all. A lot will need to be ironed out from here on. But what do you think this, in a sense, sets the precedence for when it comes to India's deal with the US?
Well, the noises that we have heard in recent months from US officials have been a little more optimistic, if I would say, about the possibility of a trade deal. But because there have been so many twists and turns in the story, I think we have to wait and see. You saw that at the APEC summit itself, President Trump again reiterated what a good relationship he has with Prime Minister Modi, and that there's going to be a trade deal with India soon. So what that means, we don't really know. But it seems that something at the official level, some understandings may have been reached, but I think these still require political sign-off by the leaders in both countries.
There needs to be a political sign-on by leaders in both countries. Professor Swaran Singh, because when something like this happens, when the US and China are on the verge of a compromise, it just realigns the playing field per se, the state of play as we know it. Professor Swaran Singh, how do you think the fact that Trump is so keen on it, the fact that Trump wants to tom-tom, the fact that he's had a great conversation with them, with China, he's also sending a message to not just to the world but to India as well. The fact that, hey, look at me, I'm able to sign a deal with China. China is coming to the table. I'm able to strike a deal with China. So should you.
I think the next great talk that Trump might have is with Taliban leaders. I'm yet to see any leader he has met and he hasn't had a great talk with that leader. So I think we should take with a bit of a pinch of salt.
Okay.
But reality, you heard Scott Lucas just mention his success rate this year on trade deals is 0.
Yeah.
And I think that should work very well for negotiations with India. He won't be tom-tomming as far as his success rate is concerned. And therefore, I think he would require not to be so much confrontationist when it comes to dealing with India. And invariably, he keeps praising Indian Prime Minister and talks of trade deal in coming weeks and so on and so on.
Fair enough.
Which means that we are not to be sort of really much worried about what is going to happen in trade negotiations. We are not doing too bad compared to other interlocutors that he's dealing with.
Okay. We will leave it at that. Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Meera Shankar and Scott Lucas and KP Lung for taking time out to be with us. And with that, it's time for a short break. That was On Point 1. On Point 2 is on rising hate crimes in Canada against South Asians, but that's coming up in just a bit. Keep it with News9.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News9, English news as it should be.
Associate sponsor, ever ready, give me power, give me red. आप हमें जानते नहीं पर मानते